want to conclude our journey into epistemology, the problem of knowledge and skepticism about the external world, with a solution that's proposed by the Scottish philosopher, not quite as famous as some of the other ones, but has in the 20th century became the latter half of the 20th century became far more famous than he had before that time. Before that time, philosopher named Thomas Reid, and Reid came up with a solution. It's called the common sense solution, which I guess people are going to like. And the point was that Reid said, gee, Descartes, Locke, Berkeley, Hume, put Malebranche in there also. We haven't studied him, but fit in as a rationalist. All of these guys made a fundamental problem that led to their answers about epistemology, that led their answers about the problem of knowledge and skepticism to be wrong. And it was the underlying theory that they're thinking about. And here's the theory that we're talking about. That is, it's what Reid calls the ideal theory, and it's kind of in part a play on the word of idea, but also it does stem the roots, or the concept that it comes from goes back to the time of Plato, when Plato was talking about there being these ideal concepts, the Platonic forms. If you know something about it, great. If not, don't worry about it. But the ideal theory, the theory that Descartes, Locke, Berkeley, Hume are all laboring under, is wrong. But here's what the theory does say. It says ideas, notice D from Feldman's diagram, is a copy. The idea in his head is a copy of A, the thing out there in the real world. And when Locke tells you we're perceiving it, we perceive the thing in the world A, and we perceive it by looking at the copy in our mind of it. And this is sometimes called representational realism. That is, the ideas in our head are representations of the thing. That is, D is a representation of the thing out there in the world, A. And he says that is a fundamental misunderstanding. The theory of perception that Locke proposes is based on that, and that is fundamentally wrong. And what's fundamentally wrong is those ideas are not copies of the objects in the external world. That is not the way perception works, but rather we directly see. That is, what's in our mind is actually the object out there in the world. We have direct perception. We directly perceive the objects in the world. And this view is also sometimes called common sense realism. And a lot of people jump to the conclusion, yeah, it's common sense because it's a commonsensical view, that everybody understands it. But no, common sense, it really goes back to the derivation of the term common sense. The reason or the justification of thinking that it's the objects in the world that are creating that things in the world make us have these perceptions is not that just we have visual sensations, but we have visual sensations of a table. We can also touch the table, right? So now we have two senses. When you talk about common senses, there are 5 senses: sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. So the idea is through multiple of these senses, one confirms the other. That's what makes our perceptions trustworthy. And another reason that Reid thinks that Descartes and all the subsequent philosophers before him have gone wrong is that they've made a certain assumption. Descartes starts, he can trust his reason. He can trust his reasons for doubting. That is, he has to be able to reason his way through. And everybody else is laboring under that same assumption to some extent, maybe Locke to a lesser extent, because when we see the second half of it is, well, we trust reason as a reliable source of knowledge, but we don't trust our senses and not our common senses. When you have multiple senses, sight, touch, taste, smell, when we have multiple senses together, Reid makes the following point. He says, well, gee, why is it that these philosophers trust reason, but they're doubtful of sense experience or experience at all? He says, haven't they come out, doesn't reason and our senses, or don't reason and our senses, weren't they built in the same shop? The idea is, didn't we kind of come into the world and we have both of these? So why is it that we find one trustworthy but the other untrustworthy? He says, well, gee, they should at least be on a par. That is, if our reason is trustworthy, then so should be our senses. And that is how Reid attempts to justify our knowledge of the external world, but moreover, B, show that all of the other guys who were worried about skepticism and trying to answer, where they went wrong. Descartes was wrong in thinking that he could trust reason but not trust his senses. He was wrong in the ideas being copies of the real world. Locke went wrong because when we perceive things, he thinks we don't have this mental image that's a copy of the physical thing, but rather the mental image is of that thing in the world. Now, I think Reid's solution seems like a good one and seems to answer a lot of the questions, but it is far from controversial to say that Reid's solution and his common sense approach, and this is common sense in the more generic term, his common sense approach to epistemology answers the problem of knowledge and skepticism and is the right approach to take in epistemology.